Hello, dear viewers. Support me by subscribing to my channel and share my video if you like it. And also, make sure you comment your thought. Now let's start the video. For the first time in her life, Ashara Dayne walked into the Tower of the Hand. She and Alice were entering the tower to discuss the girl's future. One of the attendants escorted them up to the Hand's Solar, where Ned awaited them. She could see the disdain of the guards and servants they passed. Ashara was not welcome in this place. Ned was seated behind his desk when they entered his solar. He stood to greet them, kissing their cheeks in the Dornish fashion. They sat together on the cushioned chairs, sipping sweet wine while they discussed the proposals, which had been made regarding Catelyn. "There have been 3 proposals for your hand in marriage," Ned told Catelyn when they settled. "And many more inquiries," Ashara added, not wishing for her daughter to be disappointed. Ali seemed ambivalent. "Who are the proposals from?" "One of the Freys made an offer," Ashara answered. "Though that one isn't worth a moment's consideration." Wrinkling her nose, Alice responded, "Have I even spoken to a Frey?" Ned laughed. "Around a dozen, I'd say. Lord Walder has more children, grandchildren, and various other relations than anyone else in the kingdoms. I do agree with your mother. The offer is beneath our consideration." Ashara Dayne also made an offer. "He cannot have her." Ashara was out of her seat as the words left her mouth, startling both Ned and their daughter. "Why are you so vehemently opposed to him, my lady?" Ashara sat, still seething. "Sir Geralt has been attempting to gain a foothold at Starfall for years. We feared that he might harm Edric in the battle against Lord Tywin. If Catelyn were to marry him, I fear that nothing would prevent him from attempting a more forceful coup of Starfall. Mine own reputation, and Edric still being a child, have considerably weakened our position." "He wouldn't win a coup," Ali said. "Many are far too loyal. Still, I would not assent to such a match." "I assume that the third is from Lord Fossaway." "It is," Ned replied. "I've spoken with him at some length regarding his interest in you. While I am cautious of him, he seems sincere in his interests. He has been quite upfront about his interest in you for both political and personal reasons." Elisir pressed her lips tightly together. "Is this the best offer that I shall have?" Ashara tilted her head to the side, concerned. "Do you dislike him?" She shook her head. "No, he is quite kind. We spoke and danced at Prince Quentin's wedding to the Lady Margaery. I had wished, perhaps I am still young and foolish, but I had wished to marry for love. While Lord Brian is kind, I do not love him. Moreover, should I be wedded to him, I will be bound to Cider Hall." She looked at her father, despairing. "I have only just been able to spend time with you and my half-sisters and half-brother. If I am bound to the south, shall I ever see you or them again?" Ned's solemn face grew sad. "It would be difficult, though not impossible. Your brothers and sisters would likely be able to see you more often than I, should their duties and yours allow it." With unshed tears in her eyes, Catelyn stood and walked to a window of the solar. Ashara watched her daughter, her heart breaking. She knew that one day her children would all need places of their own. Still, it seemed too soon. Ashara knew the pain of being separated from family, and did not wish it upon her daughter, no matter how inevitable it was. "It is the way of all women that we must be sent away when Ashara told her daughter. "Sweetling, it is unlikely that you shall get a better offer." Alice turned, tear-stained eyes narrowed upon her. "Because I am a bastard, and he is a lord," she said simply. "I assume no other inquiries were made by so high a noble?" "No," Ned replied. "Some for second and third sons, all of good houses. But Lord Fossaway is the highest noble who inquired about you. I do agree with your mother. This may be the best offer for your hand." Alice shut her eyes briefly, breathing deep. When she opened them again, she had a small smile on her lips. "Do you think that the match will benefit our families?" Ashara and Ned looked at one another briefly. She nodded for him to speak first. "Having family with ties to House Tyrell can only help House Stark. Valyria and I believe that it could be good for trade between the Reach and Starfall." Erisir paced the room briefly, threading her hands together. When she turned back to them, she seemed resigned. "You may tell Lord Fossaway that I accept his proposal. I am certain that when all negotiations are completed by you and him, that I will be told." When Ashara and Ned agreed with her statement, Alice feigned a smile. "Now that we are done, may I be excused?" "Of course." Ashara said gently. Ned agreed with a nod of the head, a sad smile on his lips. Allies left them with a polite half-bow of her head. When they were alone, Ashara drained her cup of wine and sighed. Our little girl is all grown up now. Ned looked to the closed door. I wish that I could offer her more. More than what you have seen to her well-being with gold and now with helping negotiate a good match for her. It is everything that you promised for her. When you first saw her, he seemed surprised by her words. I had nearly forgotten that promise in word, though not in deed. I hope that she will find happiness with this match. First, he needs to survive the siege of Dragonstone. He stared at the goblet in his hand as darkness clouded his face. From last report, very few lords still remain with Lord Stannis at Dragonstone. At this point, they have all been driven within the walls of Dragonstone, with part of our armies waiting outside their walls. When the fleet launches, they should face little resistance, though besieging the fortress will still be difficult. This is not the first siege which Lord Stannis has faced, though the circumstances are very different this time. Sir Garland Tyrell and Lord Brian Fossaway will be two leaders of the assault, though I doubt they'll be close enough to be greatly at risk. Duty often holds no joys, Ned, she offered, as a token of sympathy. She could see that the battle against Stannis Baratheon grieved him. I have known that for many long years, he replied. I will be glad to be rid of this city and back in Winterfell. She couldn't keep the sadness out of her voice. Then I shall be alone for over a year, and I shall likely never see you again. She thought to herself. She internally berated herself for thinking that she would miss Ned Stark. He was the father of her children, nothing more. I am certain that Her Grace, the Queen, will keep you quite busy. I have no doubts of that, Ashara agreed. Still, I will miss the children. I promise to keep them safe and sound while they are in my care. I am certain that you will. I have seen the love you have for all of the children, and it warms my heart. He favored her with a genuine smile. They are all a delight. You have raised your children well. Thank you. She looked to the door, thinking of Axley. She reminds me of you in many ways. She is so dutiful. He laughed. She reminds me of you, always wearing her heart on her sleeve. Though I do see how dutiful she is, in spite of how spirited she is. Have you found matches for any of the other children? For Lucas, no. For Kat's children. We are seriously considering a match for Robb and another for Sansa. There have only been inquiries about the other children. They are all so young, it seems strange that already plans are made for their futures, and Jon is already wed. Most parents plan their children's futures when they are young, unlike our own fathers. Your father planned for two of his children's futures, betrothals between House Stark and two other great houses, while you and I tried to plan our own future and failed spectacularly. He seemed both sad and amused. 4 well-raised children who are climbing high in the world is not a failure, though our actions have caused pain for many. They sat quietly for a few moments, just looking at one another, reflecting. Eventually, Ashara stood. I trust that you will manage the betrothal contract for our daughter as you did for Jon and Arthur. I do believe that it is time that I attend Her Grace. He stood. Of course, I believe that we are done with everything which needs to be discussed today. They walked to the door of the Solar where he kissed her hand in parting. Alizian Sand stood on the outer wall of the Red Keep, watching as the fleet departed to wage war against Lord Stannis Baratheon. Her betrothed was on one of those ships. Betrothed? Such a strange thought. She still had time before they married. Should he live through the siege of Dragonstone? A few years of maidenhood left to her. She had only spoken to him twice since their match had been agreed upon, and both occasions had been rather formal. The next time they were likely to meet would be on the day they wed. She would leave for Winterfell soon, and he would return to Cider Hall via Highgarden once the battle was ended. She watched the white sails as they faded like clouds into the horizon, bearing the crowned stag of House Baratheon, the gold rose of House Tyrell, and a dozen other banners. Though her family was on the side of the king, she couldn't help but feel strange that they were condemning Lord Stannis to die for refusing to bend. He was the elder brother, the heir, and did young Shireen Baratheon mean nothing? Copper for your thoughts? She turned and smiled at Ser Daimonde Sand, garbed in the white armor and cloak of his position. True to his words, he was holding out a copper, which she accepted. I was wondering if what we are doing is right. What are we doing? Sending a fleet to kill a man for doing nothing other than holding to the established laws of succession. Careful, talk like that could cost you a head, and you do have such a pretty head. Lord Stances was offered his ancestral seat of Storm's End, which was his by every law of succession. The crown's succession was a matter of dispute, solved by the bigger army winning. "It still feels wrong," she murmured. "Like accepting a marriage proposal for no reason other than the fact that he happens to be a lord." She glared at him. "Lord Brian is a kind man, and I do enjoy talking to him." "And kissing him?" He grinned at her, the dimples showing on his cheeks. She gaped at him for a moment before regaining her composure. "He and I have not had that pleasure yet, and how is life as a man sworn to chastity and honor?" He laughed. "Sworn to chastity and honor, though many of my sworn brothers have been known to have a companion. Truth be told, thus far it's boring. Perhaps things will be more entertaining as time goes by." She rolled her eyes. "So long as you are not the cause of your position growing more interesting. You sound as bad as Oberyn. Rest assured I shall not be the cause of any incidents of scandal in the royal court. Besides, Oberyn will kill me if I even look at Arianne improperly." Yaxley Sane burst out laughing. "That he will." She became thoughtful. "What did your father think of you joining the Kingsguard?" "I never asked. He was glad that I will be remembered forever, though he told me that I had better ensure I am remembered for good. I must serve with honor and dignity, and not bring disgrace to House Allarian. I am certain that you will succeed." "I am glad of your confidence. I try to be an insufferable optimist." "I am well aware of that." She rolled her eyes, annoyed by his smug attitude. "And you are just insufferable. You didn't say that when I had you on your back." She glared at him, though she was somewhat amused. "You best be careful with what you say, lest my brothers and father hear you." He looked around and shrugged. "We are atop the castle walls with nary a soul in sight." He moved so that she was trapped between the wall and him. "I could kiss you here, and no one would see." She chewed on her lip, the memory of his lips tempting her. She raised her hand and pushed lightly against his chest, her gold betrothal ring glinting in the sun. "I am promised to another, Sir Demon, and as such I must decline your scandalous offer." He stepped away with a polite bow. "As my lady wishes," he smirked slightly. "It is a pity." She tilted her head, confused. "What is a pity?" "It was fun to kiss you. Should your betrothed survive the siege of Dragonstone, I will never have the pleasure again." She narrowed her eyes. "Don't speak like that." "Like what? That Lord Fossaway might die in battle, or that I shan't kiss you?" "Both." She rolled her eyes. "It is unkind of you to say that he may die, though it is true that he may. It is improper of you to say anything of kissing me." She giggled lightly. "That we both enjoyed that fleeting moment." "Ah, so you did enjoy our time together." She felt herself flush red. "Yes," she said shortly. "Now would you kindly stop?" He bowed politely, laughing. "As you wish." As his laughter subsided, he held out his hand to her. "May I escort you from here?" "You may," she agreed, accepting his hand and walking with him away from the view of the bay. Several days after the fleet left for Dragonstone, Tyene Sand joined her cousin, the Queen, as she paid her first official visit to the hostage Marcella Hill. They waited in the gardens while the girl was brought to them. A table had been prepared with iced drinks, cakes, cheese, and fruits. They talked as they lounged, awaiting the arrival of the young girl. The weeks had passed so swiftly since they departed from Sunspear, bringing so many changes to their lives that it was dizzying. To think that a year ago she and Arianne had been unwed, happily doing as they pleased. Now they and Prince Quentyn were all married and settling into new positions. Quentyn seemed happy with Lady Margaery when they left. "They did," Arianne replied. "Margaery is a sweet girl, though she seems strong enough for Dorne. Only time will tell how well she will do." Taye laughed. A Tyrell and a Martell wedded. "I never thought we would see that day. Need makes for strange bedfellows." Tyene considered her cousin carefully. "How are you and the king faring?" Arianne looked away, forcing a smile. "We are doing well, even with his grace publicly insinuating that you were overly well acquainted with Daemon." The queen's hands curled into tight fists, though her voice remained controlled. "We are aware of one another's past indiscretions. We are committed to the future of Westeros and will cooperate to bring heirs into the world." "Oh, sweetling," Tyene whispered. "Don't fret over me," she replied, reaching across the table to grasp Tiene's hand. "I have always been bound to duty. I am the most important woman in Westeros now. Mine is to lead the kingdom as Rensley's queen, to bear his heirs, and to raise them well. It was never for me to know love such as you know. I wish that you could. A faint, somewhat bitter smile flitted across her lips. If wishes were horses, beggars would ride. Indeed! There was little else that Catelyn could think to say. I do have some good news. Ariane's eyes brightened, along with her smile. Oh, do tell. My mother has sent word that she will be coming to visit, though I suspect that you will be on your way to Winterfell by the time she arrives. That is wonderful to hear. I will very likely be gone by then, as you say. I know that Lord Stark intends to depart as soon as word arrives from the fleet at Dragonstone. Jon is on leave from his duties beginning tomorrow, when we depart to visit his lands. I am certain that your time alone with Jon will be sweet. The time spent in the north with the Starks should prove interesting if nothing else. Catelyn giggled. It will be an adventure, to be sure. Oh look, she's here. Walking toward them was little Myrcella, led and followed by guards. She was a pretty young thing, though sad. Her hair hung in golden ringlets around her delicate face, and her eyes were deep green. She seemed somewhat dazed by her surroundings, causing Tyene to wonder when the girl had last been outside. Arianne stood and walked the girl, motioning for the guards to leave. Myrcella curtsied respectfully to Arianne when they stood alone. Your Grace, she said. It is a pleasure to meet you, Myrcella, the Queen greeted. Come join us. The girl followed Arianne back to the table where they sat. This is my cousin, Tyene Sand. Hello, Myrcella. It is a pleasure to meet you. The girl smiled politely. Thank you. I am glad to meet both of you. I am pleased to host you, Arianne said. I have heard so many lovely things about you, and am happy to say that from this day forth, you will be my ward. Very soon you will be permitted to spend more time with myself and my cousins, and eventually you will be allowed to join my ladies in waiting. What do you think of that? It would be an honor, Your Grace, Myrcella replied. Though the girl was polite, there was a hollowness in her voice. Tyene favored the girl with her sweetest smile, pitying her. You must still be reeling from all of your losses, aren't you? Myrcella's lips trembled, and her eyes filled with unshed tears. I miss my family. I know in a way how you feel, Tyene replied. My sister Nymeria died in the battle against your grandfather. I always confided in her. Tommen and I would talk to each other about everything. Her eyes clenched shut shortly before she wiped at them with her hands. When she opened her eyes again, she seemed to be the saddest girl in the world. While I know that no one can replace mother, father, or sibling, two of my half-sisters are quite close in age to you. They can grow to be your friends. Would you like that? Myrcella looked between Tyene and Arianne. If that is your wish... Arianne let out a light, sympathetic laugh. Sweetling, my desire for you is that you will grow into a lovely young woman. I will oversee your education, bringing you tutors who will cultivate in you the skills needed for your station. I will assign your attendants and guards, and one day, when you are a woman grown, you will wed. Do you know of your betrothal? She nodded. I am to wed one of Lord Stark's bastard sons. You will, Tyene said agreeably. I am wedded to Jon, the eldest of Lord Stark's bastard sons, and you will be wed to Arthur, the next eldest. We will be family. Pensive, Myrcella asked. Does Arthur not wish to meet me? Arthur is a young man of 5 and 10, Arianne replied. At the moment, a girl of your age holds little interest for him. Though reluctant, Myrcella agreed with the Queen. They soon began eating, nibbling on the varieties of food, while sipping iced honey milk and sweet mint in lime water. While it was all appealing to the eyes, more than a bite of any of it turned Tyne's stomach. Eventually, she gave up on trying to eat, resigning herself to sipping the mint lime water. When they were finished, and Myrcella departed with her escort, Tyene noticed that Arianne was watching her with suspicion. What's wrong? You scarcely touched the food. As of late, most food makes me nauseous. She looked up at her cousin, an irrepressible smile spreading across her lips. Ariane's eyes went wide. Are you with child? Giggling, Tyene nodded her head in affirmation. Arianne stood, rushing to her cousin, and wrapped her in a tight embrace. Oh, that's wonderful. Have you told Jon? No, not yet. I want to tell him when we are visiting his lands, so that it is special and private. I also wanted to wait, just to be certain that I am pregnant. Arianne gave her a friendly kiss. Oh, sweetling, I am so happy for you. Thank you. I hope that soon you too may be with child, so that our babes may grow together as we did. Wouldn't that be lovely? Smiling, Arianne couldn't help but agree. It would be perfect. A gentle mist fell the entire ride from King's Landing to Severn Hall, the castle which was now the home of Sir Jon Snow. Thankfully, the castle was a rather short ride from King's Landing, 2 full days of riding south and east. The castle rose steadily before them on a hill, peaking above the tall trees of the Kingswood. It was surrounded by a moat, formed by a diversion of the Severn River. The river itself was a tributary to the Wendwater River, making its way eventually to Blackwater Bay. They crossed an arched stone bridge over the moat, which led up the hill upon which the relatively small castle was built. The wide parapets of the structure provided a strong defense against any potential foes. The pale stone of the castle seemed dull and dreary due to the grayness of the day. The castle was an L-shaped structure with 3 taller towers and a circular keep at one end of the L. There were well-maintained lawns and gardens surrounding the entire structure within the curtain walls. The gate was open to them as they rode their horses along the stony path which led to the outer bailey, beside the stables. A line of servants awaited them, standing straight and still in the light rain. The herald Jon had sent ahead of them had apparently been heeded. Jon dismounted first, close to the residence of his castle. He held the reins of his mount in hand, smiling easily, wondering how they would perceive him. A man stepped forward, old and gray, with a large nose and small eyes. He motioned for some of the men to assist the others in Jon's company with dismounting. "My lord," the man said in greeting, "may I assume that you are Sir Jon Snow?" "My lord." Jon marveled at the title. Unable to wrap his mind around the notion that in this place he would be called Lord, he heard Catelyn and Arthur stifle their laughter at his being called Lord. "Yes, I am Sir Jon. I presume that the messenger arrived." "He did, as did the ravens from his grace, King Renly. We have prepared rooms for yourself and your guests, my lord. As for myself, I am Dale, steward of Severn Hall." He turned to the line of servants and said their names and positions in quick succession. Jon feared that he wouldn't remember a single one. "Thank you, Dale," Jon replied. He turned to his wife and sister, who were now standing close behind him. "This is my wife, Tyenn, daughter of Prince Oberyn Martell." Dale bowed to her. "A pleasure to meet you, my lady." It was Jon's turn to stifle a laugh, as Teen now appeared to be perplexed by the courtesy title. Here she was a lady, while everywhere else she was merely a bastard. "Thank you," she replied sweetly. Jon turned next to his brother. While the plan had initially been for Jon and Tyenn to travel to his lands alone, save for a small escort, he had granted Arthur's request to accompany them, after extracting a promise that he wouldn't be a bother to them. "This is my brother, Sir," Arthur said. Dale bowed again. "A pleasure, sir." Jon, his wife, and his brother looked uncomfortably at one another and at the people in the yard. The castle's servants and the attendants who had accompanied them seemed to know their duties, unloading the horses, and afterward leading them to the stables. It was Dale who assisted them. "My lord, would you like to be shown around the property or to your rooms so that you might rest and change out of your wet clothes?" Jon looked to Tyenn. She had been easily tired of late. "What do you say, my lady?" "I should like to rest," she smiled at him. "However, I suppose that we could be shown some of the property while we are on the way to our rooms." They were all agree with that idea, and so the steward led them toward the entrance of Severn Hall, with Jon beside him. Tyenn trailed quite close to them, while Arthur and his companion Bella followed at a slight distance, observing their surroundings. Dale told them the history of the castle and its former residents as they walked. The castle had been built some years after Aegon's conquest by a minor noble house who had been granted the lands as a gift from the crown. The castle was built over the course of 10 years, though the various owners had built onto it over the centuries. Severn Hall had passed through several families over the years, with the previous owner dying during Robert's Rebellion and his heirs being attainted shortly thereafter. Since then, the property had belonged to Renly Baratheon, until now. The castle of Severn Hall was much smaller than Starfall, though it was still a formidable estate. As Dale walked with them, he showed them many rooms: the kitchens, the Great Hall, the library, the Maester's Tower, the privies, and finally their chambers. There were many more rooms that they had yet to see: the pantry, buttery, larder, gatehouse, small sept, storerooms, cellars, guest rooms, and many other rooms. He left them in the solar, where bread, wine, and cheese had already been laid out for them. They sat and ate while the servants continued to bring their chests to their rooms. Jon smiled stupidly at his brother and wife. This was his home, his own castle. He laughed to himself, causing his companions to look at him curiously. Arthur spoke first. What is so funny? Thinking that all of this mine and ours, a place where we and Mother may all live. You can still own a shop in King's Landing if you desire, and also live here. You and Mother and Lucas and Tyne's sisters would all be able to have rooms here, and we would still have room for more guests. We could host all of our brothers and sisters and friends. Arthur and Tyene joined in his laughter while Bella smiled politely. Whatever affections Arthur and Bella shared, she was not and could never be family. Catelyn slipped her hand in his and squeezed, her normally reserved public facade stripped away, revealing an expression of pure joy. This is wonderful. She looked around, seeing that the various servants had left. We should all change from our wet travel clothes. They agreed with her suggestion and went to their rooms to change from their damp riding clothes into dry, fresh clothing. When they were drier, Jon and Tyene rested upon the feather mattress of his bed, content to hold one another and take in their surroundings. The room was large, with 5 tall windows along one wall which would illumine the entire room on a sunny day. For the moment, the room was mainly illumined by the light of 3 candelabras and the large fireplace. 3 tapestries hung on the wall opposite the windows, depicting young men and women celebrating a wedding. The walls and ceiling were carved with a pattern of squares and leaves. The wardrobe and chests in the room were dark walnut, carved and painted with vines and roses. She curled against him, resting her head beneath his chin while he held her. "Are you happy?" He held her hand, slipping his fingers between hers. "More than I can ever remember. I have more than I ever desired." She turned, shifting so that she could look at him. Her eyes sparkled with some hidden mischief. "May I make you happier?" He eyed her curiously, unsure what she meant, for her voice did not betray her thoughts. "Always, my love." Her smile was beautiful, so happy. "Would it make you happier if our small family were to grow?" "To grow?" He puzzled at her words, wondering. When her words fully sank in, he laughed. "I would love for us to have a child." Her smile broadened. "Well, in a few months, if all goes well, we shall welcome our first child into the world." Stunned, he sat up slowly, pulling her with him. "Truly?" "Truly," she replied. He kissed her, quick and gentle, caressing her face with his hands. "This is wonderful. Are you happy?" She mirrored his actions, running her fingers through his growing beard and kissing him lightly. "More than I have ever been." She paused, pulling back slightly. "I love you." She kissed him again. She had never said that she loved him before. That moment, though he had long believed her to feel as he did. Kissing her, breathing in the scent of her, nothing was better in all the world. Here in the castle, which was his, holding his wife, who was pregnant with their first child. Life was perfect. "I will miss you, Cat," Edmure Tully was telling his sister Catelyn. "I have enjoyed the months we have been able to spend together." "As have I," Catelyn agreed. She only wished that Lysa could have been with them and that they might all have sat beside their father in Riverrun one last time. Though her thoughts of Lysa were still bitter since their parting in the Eyrie, and their uncle Brynden had written that their father, Lord Hoster Tully, was growing weaker day by day. "I will give father a kiss from you and the children." "Thank you," she said. Smiling, he pulled her into a tight embrace. When they let go of one another, he turned to Ned and the children, bidding each of them farewell. Afterward, Catelyn watched as her brother mounted his horse and joined the stream of horses and wagons which were returning to the Riverlands. Her heart sank a little as she watched her brother leave, as it always did whenever she was parted from the ones she loved. She hoped that he might marry soon, and that he might truly find happiness with whomever he wed. She prayed that he might have children to love and raise as the heirs of Riverrun. When Edmure was beyond sight, they walked toward the Tower of the Hand. As they entered the inner bailey, she spied the young queen walking with Ashara Dayne and Ellaria Sand. Behind them walked 5 of Prince Oberyn's bastard daughters, along with Alysanne and Lucas. Jon and Arthur, along with Oberyn's daughter Tyene, were away at the estate which the king had granted to Jon. Catelyn and Ned still needed to have a long conversation about Jon and many other things, but they needed to wait until they were far from King's Landing. Her eyes fell upon the youngest of Ned's bastards, the boy who was half a year older than Bran. Until the first time she had seen the young bastard, she had never seen the traces of Ned in Bran's face. Looking at young Lucas, she couldn't help but see the similarities in her mind's eye, the shape of the jaw, eyes, and nose, the crook of their lips. It cut like a knife to see the boy running around when her own son would never walk again. "May we join the queen?" Sansa asked, interrupting Catelyn's thoughts. "You may approach her grace, but she must be the one to ask for your company, sweetling. Roger Ploak bopped beside her. Arianne likes us. Queen Arianne, Sansa corrected. Queen Arianne, Arya repeated, irritated with her sister's correction. Catelyn smiled. I know that she is fond of both of you, and I am glad that you are both fond of her. She has offered positions for both of you as ladies-in-waiting when you are older. For now, you may approach her grace to see if she would like your company. Thank you, Mother, the girls said together, bobbing their heads respectfully. They walked across the courtyard together. Sansa with her measured steps and Arya with her hurried ones. They curtsied to the queen together, and a few moments later joined their half-sister and half-brother as they walked. They disappeared into the library tower shortly thereafter. Catelyn was glad that her girls both loved this queen. While Sansa had adored Queen Cersei, Arya had loathed everything about the woman, as Catelyn now did. Though Catelyn had her doubts regarding Arianne, she could not deny that the young woman was kind and charming. Perhaps a few years for each of them serving as ladies to the queen would do her daughters good. Robb excused himself so that he might tend to the dire wolves, leaving Catelyn and Ned alone in the inner bailey. I should go to him, she said. They had been discussing this plan for many days, in hushed whispers so that their schemes might not reach unwanted ears. Are you certain that this is wise? With a rueful laugh, she replied, Not entirely. But we have little choice. We are leaving soon, and he is not. If what we suspect is true, then certainly he shall be able to discern the truth of the matter. Not to our benefit, Ned replied, still leery of their plans. If what we suspect is true, then the downfall of our enemy, though by another's hand, is to our benefit. With a sigh, he kissed her brow. Shall I go with you? No, too many eyes may follow if you come. If any question why I am going, it is a simple matter to say I am offering my condolences for his losses and apologizing for any wrongs done to him by myself and my family. He nodded in agreement, parting with her in the courtyard. From there, she walked across the castle to the towers where prisoners were held. She climbed the many steps to the tower cells. Their time in King's Landing was growing short, and still so many unanswered questions lingered in her mind. When she and Ned had discussed the matter, they knew of only one person who might seek and find the truth they desired. The guards allowed her to pass through the tower with barely an inquiry. They knew who she was and that she would not contribute to the prisoner's escape. At the top of the tower, the guards unlocked the door to the cell and allowed her inside. She found Tyrion Lannister, the Lord of Casterly Rock, seated at a desk, reading a lengthy tome. He looked up, his expression changing from annoyance to surprise rather swiftly. Lady Stark, to what do I owe the pleasure of this visit? She seated herself near him, a brow raised. She sincerely doubted that he found it a pleasure to meet with her. I have questions which I have been pondering and am seeking answers. I doubt that I have many answers, Lady Stark. He looked around the room and gestured at the walls of his sparse cell. I have oft been a prisoner of late, and it seems that I am not like to leave this cell for quite some time. News is hard to come by in such a state. I am certain that you will find a way. He grinned, mischievous. I shall endeavor to try. Now what bothers you? She considered him thoughtfully, remembering him as he was when last they saw one another in the Eyrie. He had been a prisoner newly freed then, and was now a prisoner again. When I took you hostage, it was due to the words of Lord Baelish. The knife, which had been sent to slay your son, he said, a chill in his voice. I trusted him then, believed his words. He finished her thought. And now you do not. No, she agreed, irritably. I no longer trust any word which comes from his mouth. The more I think upon all that Ned and I have learned, I cannot help but think that he has some sinister plan in mind. It appears that he was working toward your death. Beyond that, he smirked. I have thought the same for some time, though I had not thought Leal of the blame on Littlefinger. What do you know? She told him everything. For many long minutes, she told Tyrion Lannister all she knew, starting with Lysa's secret letter and ending with all she and Ned had gleaned in King's Landing. He listened intently, drinking in every word. When she was finished, he considered her carefully. Plots within plots. I can see why you and your lord husband thought that myself and my siblings were to blame for the death of Jon Arryn and the attempts on your son's life. Your brother did attempt to murder my son, she reminded him, coldly. Indeed, Tyrion agreed. Though he wouldn't have been the one to hire a knife for young Brandon's throat, neither would my sister, as Jaime is her hired knife. nor would I have cause or thought to kill your son. Truly, I am sorry that he will never walk again. I understand what it is like to be considered less than whole. I cannot answer who sent the knife, but I can seek out answers to your other concerns." She raised a brow. "My concern is the downfall of a man who I once called friend." His smile was positively wicked. "I will see what I can learn. I do wonder why you have given me, a prisoner who has no loyalty to you, all these delightful bits of information." With a wry smile, she answered him. "Think of it as an apology." "I scarce believe that answer, Lady Stark. I have seen how your mind works, Lord Lantier. We share a common enemy, and while I must soon return home, you will remain here. How many days and hours will you spend thinking about the ways Petyr Baelish has attempted to bring you and your house to ruin? I wonder, someday I believe that you will find a way to bring him to ruin, freeing yourself from this tower cell. And I shall be indebted to House Stark for the knowledge you have given me." She stood, a sly smile on her lips. "I am hoping for peace between us, my lord. Someday the king will likely free you. Sooner if you can prove duplicity by Petyr. You will then be restored to your lawful seat as Lord of Casterly Rock. If you wed and have heirs, they will follow after you, as Lords of the Rock. I would see peace between our houses, for my children and their futures." He stood as well, considering her for several long moments before holding out a short, stunted hand out to her, which she accepted. "We can have peace, Lady Stark." Shortly after Ashara Dayne's sons returned from Severin Hall, their family gathered for a dinner in the Queen's ballroom. Ostensibly, the dinner was hosted by the Queen, though in truth it was Tinian and Jon who were the hosts of the dinner. The king was not there, which was a relief, as they could be less formal. Ned's children with Lady Catelyn were there, though Ned was not. Together, they were a rather small assembly for such a large hall. Still, it was Arianne's pleasure to host them in such a grand room. When they were nearly done with the meal, filled with duck, lamb, olives, peppers, and stuffed grape leaves, Jon spoke up. "Tiny and I have an announcement to make." He looked to his wife, grinning, and Ashara realized what they were going to say. "I am with child," Tyenn finished, smiling radiantly. There were cheers and congratulations all around the table, followed by hugs and kisses. As they settled again, Ishia caught Oberyn's eye, an unspoken question in her own. Could Elia and her children at last rest? Was all vengeance now complete for House Martell? A Martell on the throne, and a bastard Martell wed to the son of Rhaegar Targaryen and Lyanna Stark, now expecting their first child. Oberyn's smile was gentle, genuine. They would be grandparents now. A strange notion. They chatted late into the evening, laughing and celebrating together. As Shaira would miss days like this, time spent with all of the children. Would she ever have such times again? She would need to keep busy, lest the sorrow of being parted from the children break her. At least she would be able to go to Severin Hall during Jon's time in the north, helping her son and good daughter ensure that their lands and estate were well cared for and that their staff were performing their duties. Several days later, Ashara made her way to the septa to say her regular prayers. There were a few others inside, kneeling before the statues of the seven. Janine was there, praying to the mother. Before the crone was a red-haired woman whom Asura had taken to avoiding. Lady Catelyn Stark, their last interaction, had been at the wedding of the king and queen, and it had been less than pleasant. She stood, frozen in place. She could leave the sept and return later. She could go forward, saying her prayers to each of the seven in turn, as she had planned. Lady Stark was standing before Ashara could move. Catelyn didn't notice her at first, but when her eyes found Ashara, she stiffened. With a neutral expression, the woman approached Ashara. Behind her, Tyenn stood, her blue eyes observing with interest. No doubt the girl would whisper all that she saw to her sisters and cousin. Ashara forced a slight smile, inclining her head respectfully when Catelyn Stark was near. "Lady Stark." The other woman matched her gesture. "Lady Ashara." She stopped, clearly contemplating something. "May we speak? Though I suppose you desire to pray?" Curious. What could she do but agree? "I can postpone my prayers. The gods are ever with us." With a nod of her head, Catelyn walked toward the exit of the sept. Ashara followed closely behind. They walked side by side from the sept toward the gardens of the Red Keep. "As you know, we will be leaving very soon," Catelyn said. "I am ever aware of that. I wanted you to know that your children will be well treated while they are under the care of myself and my husband. You seemed to imply as much when last we spoke, Ashara replied, her tone neutral. Catelyn's lips twisted into a grim expression. As I recall, that was not the most pleasant of discussions. Ashara couldn't hold back the laugh which escaped her lips. No, it was not. You treated my daughters with kindness when they were in Dorne, welcoming them as though they were your own, giving them gifts and gowns. Most of the gowns and gifts came from the Mortels. She countered. Even so, your children will be shown no less kindness. Thank you, Lady Stark. She turned to the side as she spoke, and noticed Dayne following at a respectable distance. Ashara laughed, causing Catelyn to look in the same direction. That girl is one of Prince Oberyn's daughters, isn't she? Yes, Dayne, the third of his daughters and Jon's wife. Catelyn replied. That explains her not-so-subtle interest in our conversation. At least she is trustworthy. Unlike the other ears and eyes who are certainly hearing and watching us, she will also be traveling to Winterfell with you. I'm due to birth a child there, I have heard. My first grandchild, and Prince Oberyn's first grandchild. Lady Stark frowned. You dislike my children having children of their own? No, she replied quickly. I no longer fear your children trying to usurp mine own. I was merely thinking of what I know regarding you and Oberyn Martell. Ashara looked away, clenching her jaw. The prince and I have a complicated history, she replied quietly. Lady Stark considered her circumspectly, but said nothing further on the matter. Dayne looks very different from her sisters. They are all different in their own ways, each taking after their mothers in some respects and their father in others. Nymeria had a distinctly Volantene look to her. Salor's mother is from the Summer Isles, and she looks little different from a Summer Islander. Valantine's mother is a Septa. Catelyn inhaled sharply. A Septa. She was sent to the faith as a girl. She was one too many mouths to feed, even though she is of noble birth, from the Riverlands originally. She seemed both bothered and intrigued by the conversation. Of what house? House Blaintree. Her name is Arwen. Wide-eyed, Catelyn looked back at the girl who was acting as though she wasn't following, then to Ashara again. I knew her mother when we were just girls. She was the 10th child in the family. Her sister, Sibylway, was sent to the faith as well. You disapprove of her having borne a bastard after having been forced into the faith as a child. She looked at Ashara coldly. We all have our duties, whether we like them or not. Ashara rolled her eyes, laughing. Weren't you ever young and foolish? Share a few kisses with a young man in your youth. A flush of pink spread across Catelyn's cheeks. So you were a spirited girl. I've little doubt that you kissed Brandon. He was ever a charming young man. Brandon was charming, Catelyn said shortly. He had an easy smile, and a quick wit until the day he was murdered by an evil man. To the sorrow of all, Ashara agreed. Sorry that she had brought up Ned's brother. As for your rather prodding inquiry, Brandon and I did share kisses. We were pledged to marry. A kiss is not an offense against the gods. She laughed suddenly. Murder is an offense against the gods. Lying is an offense against the gods. Sex is a gift from the gods. Which is meant for marriage. It is, but the gods forgive the indiscretions of their faithful, do they not? Bastards may be born of lust, but they are still children, and all children are gifts from the gods. Catelyn was quiet for some time, looking at her with narrowed eyes. All children are gifts, she replied eventually. Though the lives of children are made easier or harder by the choices of their parents. Ashara managed a brittle smile, attempting to ignore the barb. Of course they are. I am certainly pleased that you have promised to show kindness to your husband's bastards when they are in your care. As you say, Lady Ashara, she replied, ice in her tone. I must be going now. I thank you for your time. Of course, she bowed politely, attempting to hide the smirk on her lips. Ashara watched as Catelyn turned and walked from her. A moment later, she pushed thoughts of their conversation out of her mind and walked to her son's wife, deciding that she needed to have a talk with the young woman about keeping her nose out of places where it did not belong. After weeks of waiting for word from the fleet at Dragonstone, Lord Eddard Stark received permission from the king to return to Winterfell. He had been in King's Landing for a little over a year, and had longed to return home the whole time. He would be one of the last lords to depart the city. The crowds of lords, ladies, knights, and courtiers had thinned considerably since the wedding of the king and queen. He had faith that Rensley Baratheon would be a good king if he listened to his counselors. Thus far, Robert's youngest brother was doing well in his position. He prayed that the gods would give the young king and queen wisdom so that they would rule well. He prayed that the gods would forgive them for the wrong they did to Lord Stannis Baratheon. Ned's household and remaining retainers were a day away from departing for the north, when the Raven finally arrived from Dragonstone. Ned stood in the small council chamber one final time to bear witness to the letter's contents, though rumor had swiftly spread throughout the castle regarding the fate of the mission. Months of blockade and siege had prevented Lord Stannis Baratheon from gathering allies and had dwindled the food supplies within Dragonstone. Those who had attempted to join Lord Stannis had been slain at sea or shortly after making landfall on the island. When the king's new forces under the command of Sir Garland Tyrell arrived, they knew that the people within the fortress would be weak, desperate for food. Breaking through the gates promised to be a bloody endeavor, so they had shouted promises of amnesty to whomever would open the gates to them. Some of Stannis's men turned against him, opening the gate, but Renslaye's men had been fools, rushing inside instead of waiting for Stannis's forces to come out. 50 of Renslaye's men died from boiling oil and arrows as they entered Dragonstone. The men who had raised the portcullis had been the first to die. Still, with the way open, the king's men flooded into the courtyard. Weapons at the ready, a bloodbath had ensued. 200 more of the king's men had died in that courtyard, shot down by bow and crossbow. As the army progressed, more died by mace, spear, axe, and sword, though Stannis's men died in greater numbers once higher ground had been achieved. In the end, 1,000 men, enemy and ally alike, lay dead throughout the fortress. Lord Stannis Baratheon had fought well and hard, dying with a blade in his hand. His wife, Lady Cialis of House Florent, was still alive. She was held as a hostage, along with several others. Her fate, and that of the other hostages, would await the king's pleasure. The last bit of news in the missive from Sir Garland Tyrell was that Lady Shireen Baratheon had also died. There had been a struggle while trying to take her in hand, and she had fallen from one of the battlements, her body lost at sea, to the sorrow of all. King Renly Baratheon had been quiet and solemn at the word of the deaths of his brother and niece. Though the king had seemed confident of his choices to send the fleet to Dragonstone, knowing the fate of his family seemed to weigh heavily on the young man's mind. Afterward, Renly gave instructions for the treatment of the prisoners, established a castellan of Dragonstone, and gave orders for the fleet to return home once all was finished. Ned did not speak much for the rest of that day, other than to send word to Oxley-Sian that her betrothed was alive and well. After ensuring that his household was prepared for their departure the following day, he sought the peace and solace of the godswood. He prayed for hours, asking that the gods forgive him for the wrong he had done to Lord Stannis and his daughter. He prayed for safety during the long journey to Winterfell, and for his family to be at peace with one another. He returned to Catelyn late that night, still solemn when he lay beside her. He threaded his fingers through her long auburn locks, distracted from the cares of life by the simplicity of her hair. Her hair, which glowed like flame in the candlelight. "Are you at peace, my love?" Her gentle words brought him to the present. "My time in the godswood helped me bear the news. I knew that this day was inevitable when I chose to place Rensley upon the throne. Yet I cannot help but feel that this was a deed ill done on my part. They say that Stannis died fighting. Is that not a better death than execution?" He made a wordless grunt of agreement. For most men, though he was seldom a man of war. "You made choices to protect our family," she reasoned quietly. "After the king was chosen, the ends were no longer in your hands." Rosade gave his brother many chances to lay down arms, all of which he spurned. "I know," was his quiet reply. "Lady Shireen's death disquiets you, doesn't it?" She was Arya's age. She shivered at his words, so he wrapped his arms around her. "I thank the gods that you and our children are safe." She clasped his hands and held them tight. "Do you believe that she was murdered like the Targaryen children?" "No! The Tyrells had wanted her alive. They would have made certain that everyone knew to spare her. I do not believe that her harm was intended, but war is a brutal thing." "It is," she whispered in reply. They held one another in quiet for several long minutes before she spoke again. "You did what you had to do, my love." He pressed a wordless kiss to the back of her head. He knew that the deaths of Stannis and Shireen Baratheon also bothered her deeply, but her words of encouragement helped to assuage his guilt. He knew not what would have become of himself or his children had he chosen Stannis over Renly. He had to live with the consequences of his choices, including the guilt he felt at the death of an innocent. He held her close that night, glad to have her beside him. He was ever grateful that they were mending their relationship. She made the darkness of life bearable. He longed for the days when they could be home again, working toward the future together. At first light, they broke their fasts and gathered in the outer yard. The grooms and attendants had gathered their horses and wagons well before the sun had risen, loading them with the provisions they would need for the journey north. Most farewells had been said over the preceding days and weeks, but a small party still came forward to see them off. Queen Arianne Martell walked arm in arm with her cousin Tyenn, while Prince Oberyn Martell, his paramour Illyria, and the rest of his children followed after them. Ned's children with Ashara Dayne came quickly behind them, with Ashara Lord Edric Dayne, Lady Illyria Dayne, and Lord Beric Dondarrion. The trunks holding the belongings of Ashara's children and the attendants who would accompany them were already with the wagons which were going to Winterfell. New clothing had been made and packed for all of the children, warm vestments for the cooler weather. Now that autumn had arrived, the weather would only grow colder. One by one, Alysir, Jon, Arthur, Lucas, and Tyenn kissed their family and friends farewell, joining the column which was preparing to leave. They would all ride from the city, though there was a carriage for the women and children to ride in, when needed. When all were mounted, save Ned, he looked around the yard one final time. So much had changed since his arrival. A year before, so many lives had been changed for good and ill. His eyes fell upon Ashara. She was watching her children, holding back tears. He walked to her to say a final farewell. The eyes of everyone in the yard seemed to be watching them as Ned approached her. They walked a few paces away from everyone so that they might not be overheard. The days will pass swiftly, he told her gently. She forced a tremulous smile. I know, Ned. I will ensure that they write to you often. And when Jon's child is born, I assure you that you will be told. She laughed at that, shaking her head. It seems like just yesterday that he was a babe in arms. Catelyn as well. I remember the day Oberyn laid her beside Arianne in her infant bed. Now those babes are married and having babes of their own. That is the nature of life. He looked at her, seeing in the early morning light the delicate lines around her eyes, the threads of silver in her black hair. I thank you for all that you have done. She smiled wryly. I am simply a mother who tried to raise her children well. Now it is your turn to teach them what you can. I will do my best. Farewell, Ashara. The unshed tears were in her eyes again. Farewell, Ned. He turned to walk away when she spoke again, halting his steps. I will miss you. He looked at her again, a faint, sad smile on his lips, and inclined his head to her. He walked away, mounting his horse. Ned Stark didn't look back as they passed through the portcullis, then through the city. They left King's Landing by the Gate of the Gods, riding north along the King's Road, north to Winterfell. It's snowing, Arya's excited shouts rang out throughout the camp. From the sounds of the camp, she was far from the first person awake, though she was easily the most vocal. Catelyn Stark turned in her camp bed to face her husband. He was awake as well, though neither desired to leave the warmth of their furs. Snow already, we must be close to home, she with a smile. We should arise so that we may assess the situation. She sighed, curling closer to him instead of away. She wanted to be home, but she also wished to remain as they were, close and content. Home, and their youngest sons were only 3 days away. I suppose we must, she eventually agreed. They dressed quickly in the warm wool, leather, and fur clothing which was made for the north and winter. The silks and linens of the south in summer were packed away until spring bloomed again. When they opened the tent flap, a cold gust of air filled with flurries greeted them. Early morning light, dimmed by falling snow, filtered through the trees which surrounded their encampment. The cooks, grooms, and many more attendants were busily preparing for the day. Arya was running between the tents, Direwolf at her heels, shouting the arrival of snow. Eventually, other children joined her. They stood together, watching their youngest daughter as she moved excitedly between the tents where her sister, brother, and half-siblings slept. After a few minutes, Ned left to find Vieille and Pole. Slowly, the other children emerged from the tents. She watched with curiosity as the Dornish bastards emerged from their shelters into the white which fell from the sky. Alysanne Sand emerged from the tent she shared with Sansa and Arya, wide-eyed and open-mouthed. Sansa stepped out behind her, a broad smile lighting across her face. Robb from his tent with his half-brothers, Arthur and Lucas. From a third tent, the young lovers, Jon and Tyenn Sand, appeared. They had never seen snow before, Catelyn realized as she watched the bastards. They were all looking around in wonder, Only Prince Oberyn's daughter was old enough to truly remember winter, and she had likely only seen winter in Dorne. Snow never fell upon the sands of Dorne. Robb, Sansa, and Arya instructed their half-siblings on the arts of playing in the snow. Catelyn smiled to herself as she watched them. Strange though the sight was. Robb, Jon, and Arthur were young men now, all blooded in battle. One betrothed, one wed, and her own to be betrothed very soon. Even so, they stood with the girls and Lucas, trying to catch snowflakes on their tongues. By the time Ned rejoined her, the children were throwing snow at one another. She and Ned could do little but watch them and laugh. After an hour or two, the snow slowed to a stop, and the sun shone bright. By the time they resumed their journey northward, the snow had mostly melted away. 3 days later, the high gray walls of Winterfell grew along the horizon. Home. After all the long months away, the chill of autumn was in the air, but the sight of home was warming. Overall, the journey to Winterfell had gone well. The weather had been mostly favorable, and the children had gotten along most of the time, with a few small spats between Sansa and Arya, or Arya and Lucas. The older children had small quarrels as well, but none had lasted more than a day. Catelyn had watched them all during the journey. For the first time, she truly paid attention to Ned's bastards. The boys, 3 young men and 1 boy, in truth, would jest and spar with one another amiably. They weren't perfect friends, but they were friendly, working on forging fragile ties to one another. Robb's half-brothers all seemed to be better companions for him than Theon Greyjoy had ever been, with the possible exception of Arthur. Arthur Sand was a temperamental young man. He reminded Catelyn of Ned's brother Brandon's spirited, rash, and prone-strong outbursts of emotion. Catelyn could also see Ned in the bastard boy in the brooding spirit which they shared. It was not the boy's rough nature which bothered Catelyn, though she did find his moods disconcerting, so much as the presence of the young woman named Bella, who had been delicately introduced as his paramour. The girl named Bella was rumored to have been a whore before she joined the household of Ned's bastards after the war. Ned had told Catelyn that while he disapproved of his bastard son's choice in a bed warmer, the young woman was able to calm Arthur and take his mind away from the horrors he had seen in the war. Thankfully, the pair had enough sense to be discreet about their liaisons, and Bella spent most of her time with the many attendants in the column traveling to Winterfell. Even so, Catelyn was not over fond of having the whore-turned paramour in their company, concerned that it might have a negative impact upon Robb. In contrast to the volatile nature of Arthur was the quiet and shy Lucas Sand. When they had first begun the journey north, the boy had scarcely spoken during their meals. He seemed most comfortable with people he knew well, and uncomfortable speaking to anyone else. As the weeks had passed, the boy seemed more comfortable, though he was still rather quiet. Catelyn's emotions were rawest regarding Lucas. Ned's youngest bastard was not only evidence of Ned's greatest betrayal, he looked so much like Bran that she could scarcely look at the boy. Oh, she knew that there were differences, Tully traits in Bran and Dayne traits in Lucas, but their shared Stark traits reminded her so keenly of her son who would never walk again. Still, she was grateful that the boy was well behaved. Catelyn often watched Ashara closely. An eldest child, she was a leader and a diplomat, constantly watching out for each of her siblings, half or full making no difference to her. She would ride beside Saintsir one day, talking of dancing, clothes, art, and music. The next day, she would ride beside Arya, speaking of swords, horses, and heroes of renown. Catelyn had been surprised to learn that Ashara was trained in swordplay, and more surprised, though she shouldn't have been, that Prince Oberyn's daughter was similarly trained. Sand had always seemed to be so proper. Catelyn should have remembered that Sand was the Red Viper's bastard, no matter what else she seemed to be. Ned had confessed to Arya's sword training shortly before their daughters had arrived in King's Landing from Dorne. She had been less than thrilled by her husband's decision to encourage their daughter's wildness. However, her opinion changed once she saw Arya training. Under the instruction of her swordmaster, Arya was both focused and happy, so Catelyn agreed with Ned that their daughter should continue her training. The swordmaster, Syrio Forel, was still in the employ of House Stark on his way to Winterfell. Catelyn had also been forced to admit that Alicent and Tywin were good influences on Arya. Every time that Catelyn or Septa Mordane had attempted to make Arya behave as was befitting her position as a highborn lady, Arya had rebelled. When Alicent and Tywin asked the same things of Arya, she usually submitted to their requests. Whatever the cause, Catelyn was glad that her wild little she-wolf might one day be tamed. Catelyn was growing accustomed to Ned's bastards, though she could not claim to love them as her children and husband did. She no longer feared that they might be a threat to her own true-born children. None of them seemed to have ambitions in the north, and their marriages would keep them in the south as Ned had promised. Alysanne's marriage would be the most powerful of the marriages for Ned's bastards, but a minor house in the Reach was of little concern to the lords of the north. Arthur would either fulfill his betrothal to the bastard Myrcella, or break it for his lover. In either event, Ned's elder bastard son would likely not have a presence in the north. Young Lucas Sand, though unpromised, was unlikely to cause any issues for his siblings. Aside from the boy's quiet and gentle nature, he held the distinction of being the youngest of 4 bastard siblings, and the 3rd youngest out of Ned's 9 claimed children. With so many true-born and elder siblings, the boy would need to depend upon his talents and the kindness of others for any position once he came of age. Then there was Jon, who was the son of Ned Stark and Ashara Dayne. So far as the world knew, when they were past the neck, Ned had finally told her everything regarding the young man. It was painful to hear and difficult for Ned to tell her. Still, there was a relief in finally being told truths, though they had been grim. What her husband had been through in the war was horrific. She tried to imagine Ned as he had been when they had first met, days before their wedding. He had lost his father and brother by that point in the war, and in marrying Catelyn, he had accepted that he would never see his one-time lover again. For him to kill Ashara's brother, witness his sister's death, and need to hide his nephew at the end of the war, only compounded the horrors Ned experienced. Catelyn could not imagine how deeply Ned must have been shaken upon arriving at Starfall after Arthur and Lyanna's deaths, and learning of Alysanne's existence. While there was no excuse for Ned's actions regarding Ashara Dayne, Catelyn could understand the complexity of events which had led to Arthur's existence. She could also somewhat understand the smug air which Ashara had affected every time they had interacted. Ashara had been entrusted with Ned's darkest secret, while Catelyn had not. However, Catelyn understood Ned's desire to push away the past so that he could build a new future in Winterfell. She was beginning to understand so many things about her husband and the weights he carried with him. The pain would heal in time as they worked to build their future together, for however long the gods gave them. She had watched Jon and Taye with curiosity. The son of Rhaegar Targaryen and Lyanna Stark wed to a Martell bastard. It was a strange thing. Their marriage had been arranged, but their affection was genuine and had begun long before their match was made. She understood the implications of the marriage, even before Ned spoke with her of the reasons he and Oberyn had in forging the pact. The Martells wanted to control the Targaryen heir, even if the boy remained ignorant of his heritage. Perhaps hiding the truth was for the best. Trusting Renly's loyalty to Jon as a shield, if the truth became known, seemed a fool's notion. The lie Ned had devised to claim that Jon was Brandon's bastard, crude though it was, would be a safe lie to tell if needed. No one would or could seek out information about the long-dead Brandon Stark and some equally long-dead nameless woman. The sins of the past could remain buried and forgotten. The child, which was now visibly growing within Tyene sand, could live in relative safety. They arrived at Winterfell near dusk. The gates were open to welcome home the Lord of Winterfell and his family. Inside were several rows of people, residents and guests of Winterfell, all cheering their arrival. At the center of the courtyard stood Maester Luwin, Ser Roderick Cassel, who was holding Rickon so that the boy wouldn't bolt toward the horses, and Bran, who was seated on a wheeled chair, a thick fur covering his legs. Though she was overjoyed that Bran was alive and awake, it cut deeply to see him as he was. He should be running, climbing, laughing. As it was, he sat still and proud, a broad smile on his face. Ned dismounted first, walking to Bran as Robb helped Catelyn off her horse. The assembly all knelt before Ned, except for Ser Roderick and Bran, who both bowed their heads. "Lord Stark," Bran said in his loudest, most commanding tone, "Winterfell is yours." "I thank you for leading in my absence, Brandon," Ned replied, his voice full of emotion, "as well as in the absence of your mother and Robb and your sisters." Tears shone in Bran's eyes, which he tried to blink away, but failed. Ned bent before their second son and wrapped him in an embrace, whispering in his ear. When he pulled away, Bran was smiling again. Rickon was squirming so much in Roderick's arms that the knight was forced to set the youngest Stark on the ground. He ran straight into Ned's arms, though a moment later he was squirming for Catelyn, who was standing beside Ned. They settled on holding their youngest boy together. Robb, Sansa, and Arya surrounded Bran, each of them hugging and kissing him while they spoke over top of one another. Grey Wind and Nymeria howled, and their voices were echoed by Shaggy Dog and Summer, who were within the Godswood. Soon the two in the yard were yipping and whining like pups. They howled again for their brothers. "Can we go to Summer and Shaggy?" Bran raised his voice, above the voices of his brother and sisters, who were still talking excitedly. Catelyn smiled at him. "When we are finished with greetings, why don't you and Robb take Nymeria and Grey Wind to the Godswood so that they can run with their brothers? They will be in the way while we are settling tonight, but in the morning they may run freely with you and your brothers and sisters." "Nymeria is going to have pups," Rudia shouted in excitement. "Pops?" Rickon extricated himself from under Catelyn's chin, where he had firmly lodged himself. "Nymeria and Grey Wind mated when we were in King's Landing," Robb said. "She began to look pregnant quite recently, but we don't know how long it will take until she whelps the pups." Ned looked around the yard. "Robb, please take the wolves to the Godswood. Cat, why don't you and the rest of the children head to my solar? I will finish greeting the men and meet all of you there." "Of course, my lord," Catelyn replied in agreement. She pressed a kiss to Rickon's messy hair and made him stand upon the ground, though he struggled to remain in her arms. Once he was down, she motioned for the children to follow her. They did as they were told, Robb leading the wolves to the Godswood, while the rest of Ned's children followed Catelyn into the keep. Hodor pushed Bran's chair to the keep, and then carried him the rest of the way to the solar. His legs were so small, so useless, but Bran was alive. By the grace of the gods, Bran was alive. The solar had been readied for their return. There was a fire in the hearth, and the candles were lit. On the table were trays of bread, cheese, and meat, and tankards of water and wine. They nibbled at the food while they waited for Ned and Robb to arrive. While they waited, the Sansa and Arya performed the task of introducing Bran and Rickon to their half-siblings. Bran understood who they were, while Rickon was merely confused and far more interested in clinging to Catelyn. The girls regaled Bran with story after story from their journeys in the south. Her second son seemed falsely happy with their stories. He had wanted to be a knight, Catelyn knew. He had wanted to go south. Still, how could he resist the stories of his sisters and half-siblings talking of fleeing King's Landing, swimming in the water gardens, and witnessing the wedding and coronation of King Renly Baratheon and Queen Arianne Martell? Ned and Robb arrived as the girls were telling Bran about the small melee for the Kingsguard positions. They had skipped many months of stories in order to reach that event so quickly in their tales, while Bran still seemed disappointed that he had not been able to see what his sisters had seen. He was still amazed by all they were telling him. Rickon also delighted in their stories, asking 100 questions. They talked for hours, delighting in the company of one another. For the first time ever, all of Ned's children were gathered in one place. Catelyn watched Ned and smiled, adoring him for the love he showed his children, even his bastards. They were a family, a highly unorthodox family, but a family nevertheless, and they were home. A little over 2 weeks after arriving in Winterfell, Yaxela, Jon, Tyenn, Arthur, and Lucas gathered together to read letters which had arrived for them from the south. Stacked in a pile, they briefly glanced at them all before choosing the ones to read first. Amongst the letters was a gift for Yax, a carved stone box inlaid with gleaming gems and seashells. She opened the box first, while Jon looked at a letter from their mother and Tyenn looked at a letter from Arianne. Upon opening the box, she produced a silver necklace studded with sapphires and amethysts, as well as a ring, bracelets, and ear clips, which were similarly wrought. "Oh, that's lovely," Tyenn said. "Who is it from?" Lucas asked, curious, though he was wandering the room, clearly bored. "Brian, my betrothed," Alice answered. "What does the letter say?" Tati asked, setting the letter she was reading aside. "It's private." "I'll tell you what Arianne wrote me if you share," Tye offered. With a dramatic eye roll, Alice read her letter. "Dear Alysanne, I hope this letter finds you in good health. I am writing from Highgarden and am uncertain whether or not you will be at Winterfell by the time it arrives. Before leaving Dragonstone, I wrote to Cider Hall to send some of my family's ancestral jewelry to Highgarden so that I might send some to you. This set has been in my family for more than 200 years, and I believe that it will suit you well. I hope that you will think of it as a token of all that is to come. I expect that we shall correspond regularly during your stay in the north and look forward to knowing you better before we meet again. I understand from our last correspondence that you will remain at Winterfell for a year. I hope that this time with your family is enjoyable. I trust that near the end of your time with your family, we will discuss in some detail the dates and preparations for our wedding. He's so boringly formal, Arthur interrupted, wrinkling his nose. We are strangers entering into an arranged marriage. At least he is kind and seems interested in me. I can't say the same of your poor betrothed. The bastard I'm to marry is a child born of incest and treason. Allie scowled at him. A sweet child who lost everything. It wouldn't hurt to show some interest in her, to show her some kindness. What would I write to her about? What do I have in common with a girl who was raised as a crown princess? Daenerys looked at him, smirking. Oh, my sisters have been spending a great deal of time with the Lannister bastard. Arianne wrote that Doria and Alia have been teaching her a great many things. That's a frightening thought, Jon muttered, somewhat humorously. Allie swore under her breath. Ely is teaching her things. She stared at Taiyang, wide-eyed. Caxley laughed and shook her head. Don't fret, Arianne is watching them. The boys looked between them. I'm missing something, Jon said. So am I, Arthur agreed. Tywin rolled her eyes before looking directly at Arthur. Alia adores you. She saw you kissing Bella and was devastated. We have been working to help mend her broken heart. One of Arianne's goals is to have my little sister not hate the girl you were supposed to marry one day. Lucas, who had been listening to them, piped up. Is Marcella going to learn how to use a sword? Tywin grinned. Likely. Do you hate me? Arthur asked, only half seriously. No, Tiang said. My sisters and I have always been fond of you all, and you are marvelously fun to provoke. So glad to be of service, he answered sardonically. Laughing, Alice returned to her letter. There is more to Brian's letter if you want to hear it. He's boring, Lucas declared. What did Mom and Queen Arianne write? Jon, having read their mother's letter while Euris was looking at her jewelry, lifted it again. Mother asks after our health and sends her love. She wrote more than that, the boy protested. Jon smiled a bit. Of course she did, but I also want to hear what the Queen wrote. They turned to Taye as she began to read Arianne's letter. Sweetling, I miss you more and more every day. Perhaps it is the knowledge that we will be apart for so long that makes the feeling worse. Are you and the babe well? I await news of your child's birth so anxiously, though it is months away. How much worse will I be when it is mine own? On that matter, His Grace and I are making our best attempts, though I am not yet carrying our much-needed heir. Pray for that sweetling, for without a child, I am afraid. If you have yet to hear, my brother Quentin and his wife Marguerite are expecting. This only makes me feel inadequate. Do not misunderstand. I am happy for them, and for Dorne's future. As to your own sisters, Yagia and Doria have taken to teaching Marcella the very unladylike pursuits of running, tree climbing, and mild defensive skills. If Rainsley learns of this, he will either be furious or think it hilarious. I cannot say. His Grace and I are friendly, though we do not hold one another in confidence. The Lannister bastard is growing more comfortable with myself and your sisters, and I think that she is beginning to feel safe. Rainsley assures me that he will not execute her under any circumstance, and I trust him on that matter. Your father still wishes to send some or all of Adelaria's girls back to Dawn, not trusting of King's Landing. However, he does not wish to send Ilaria away, and she will not part from her little ones. So for now, that matter remains unsettled. I have finally learned of Cyrill's current ambitions. Do you know what she is doing? Is she mad? I always knew that she was rebellious, but this choice could be quite problematic if it comes to light. What is Cyrilla doing? Alice interrupted. I am forbidden to say anything, Catelyn said. Rest assured that if I were allowed to tell you, I would. Father knows and has given her his blessing. A moment later, once their grumbling ceased, she continued reading the letter. As for Obara, she seems to be recovering from Nim's death more and more as the days pass, though it is still strange to know we will never see her again. I know that it must still be difficult for you. Obara recently took a lover. Her choice was quite the shock, and is the talk of the court, I assure you. It seems that she and Lord Theon Greyjoy took to practicing together in the yards, which led to dinners together, and then to long nights. I think that they both see one another as conquests, and the gods only know how it will end. Your father thinks it highly amusing. In other news, my mother is coming. Wait, Jon interrupted. Oberyn and Greyjoy, that would be what she wrote, Tywin replied. They burst out laughing, finding the matter entertaining, except for Lucas, who was too young to grasp the details of the situation. When they quieted, Elise looked at Tywin. Lady Milario is going to King's Landing. She is, and that is some of what Arianne wrote about in the rest of the letter. Her tone gave the distinct impression that she was not going to tell them any more on that topic. She tucked Arianne's letter away in a pocket of her dress and sifted through the remaining letters with seeming indifference. Oh, here's one for you, Alice. Alice looked at the seal and froze. The wax was white, and the seal was a shield. She could see Tywin's curiosity and wondered if it would be better or worse to open the letter in private. She forced herself to open the letter, knowing whom it was from, before she broke the seal. She thanked the gods that her brothers were momentarily distracted by letters from their mother, aunts, and cousin. She felt her face growing hot and her hands freeze as she read the letter. If she had been in King's Landing, the king would have needed to find another King's Guard. She wanted to kill Sir Daemon's Sand, and yet— "What are you reading?" Arthur snatched the letter from her hands. "Give it back," she shrieked, and lunged toward him. He ran, glancing at the letter. "You and Daemon?" His voice was taunting. They ran into the hall, the other three close behind, and ran straight into Robb. Both Robb and Arthur fell, slamming onto the flagstone floor. Yaxley snatched her letter back and was promptly pulled away by Jon so that she wouldn't attack their brother. The girl behind Robb gasped and stepped back, startled. Robb stood first, and then helped Arthur off the floor. "Let me go," Alice hissed. "Are you going to attack him?" Jon asked, his voice a low whisper in her ear. "No." He released her arms, and she breathed deep to calm her shaking. Jon rubbed her shoulders with one hand, a calming gesture. Robb smiled easily at them, attempting to disarm the situation. He motioned for the girl to step forward, and she did, taking his arm. "Father said that Lucas should attend lessons with Master Luwin, and I wanted to introduce you to Lady Willa Manderly. Willa, these are my half-siblings, Alysanne, Arthur, Lucas, Jon, and Jon's wife Tywin." He motioned to each of them in turn, and they all greeted the young woman with polite formality. Willa took a step forward, still holding Robb's arm, a playful smile on her lips. "It's a pleasure to meet all of you. Please, don't be embarrassed. My sister and I have had many spats, which were quite the display. Might I ask what the excitement is about?" Alice glared at Arthur and crushed Daemon's letter in her hand before she controlled herself and smiled. "A friend from home wrote a rather provocative letter to me, and my brother decided to snatch it and read it." Willa grinned. "Oh, what sort of letter, if you aren't opposed to sharing?" She sighed. "Why not?" As long as she could stop Daemon sending letters like this in the future. His words were relatively harmless. "Sure, let's go back in the room. Lucas, go to your lessons." "But I haven't read Mother's letter." Jon looked at their little brother sternly. "Her letter will still be here when your lessons are done. I already told her what she wrote. Father said for you to go to your lessons." With so many older siblings giving him the same commanding look, Lucas gave up and left. The others all entered the room, curiosity plainly visible on all their faces. Jon was still moving to keep Axley sane and Arthur apart. Once inside, everyone sat, except for Elise. She took a few steps away, standing near a wall. "Sir Daemon, Sand, newly of Kingsguard, and I shared a kiss once and he felt like writing to me," rather poetically. She flushed red. He wrote several insinuations which were very inappropriate. Tywin looked at her, something dangerously calculating in her eyes. Willa seemed amused. Alysanne's three brothers all had very overprotective expressions. It was Tywin who spoke first. "When did you two?" "The night of the royal wedding. And that was all." Tywin stood and walked to her. "May I read the letter?" Pausini knew Daemon, and Alice trusted Tywin. She handed her the letter. After reading it, Tywin swore so fiercely that even Jon was shocked. "And all you did was kiss?" Tywin's mask of gentle poise returned, dangerously calm. "Yes, Alice," he insisted. Something in Tywin's expression told Alice that she doubted her words, but she said nothing on that matter. "I could write to Father about him." Alice stared at her, stunned. "I don't want him dead," she gasped. "I simply want him to stop being so insufferable. I am pledged to wed a lord. I can't have him sending me letters like this." I will write to him, Tyrant said, resting a gentle hand on Alysanne's arm. No, I can handle it. No, you can't. You don't have to fight every battle alone. We are your family. Taxleet's deep blue eyes held Alysanne's for several long moments, and the younger girl relaxed. You can write to him. Tidy smiled. Sweetness and danger mixed together. They walked toward the table where the others were sitting. Adis joined them, but Tidy walked to the fireplace and threw the letter inside before she took her place beside Jon. With a look of genuine guilt and sympathy, Arthur looked at her. I'm sorry. Yaxley's forced a little smile. It's fine. You didn't know, and you were just teasing. She turned to Wola, mortified by the impression she must have made upon her. I am sorry that you witnessed this unpleasantness. The girl cocked her head to the side, and Alice noticed that the girl's long blonde hair had a strangely greenish tinge. I take no offense, like I said. My sister and I have made our own spectacles. I am, however, amazed by how swiftly you resolve arguments. Rob laughed. You should see Sansa and Arya fight. They have improved, said Atsley in defense of her sisters. Rob countered her words, except for that one fight on the way home, which Tyrien had to mediate. I don't know how you managed that. I have 5 younger sisters, Tyrien stated simply, and every one of us is our father's daughter. I've had to play peacekeeper more than once. How many sisters do you have? Willa asked. 6. She amended the number quickly. There were 8 of us before the war. My elder sister Nymeria died in the battle against the Lannisters. I am so very sorry to hear that. Sympathy shone plainly on Willa's face. She seemed so genuine, so kind. Alice thought that her father and his wife had indeed chosen a good match for Winterfell's heir. Is it normal for Dornish women to fight in battles? Adalys was the one to answer. Queen Nymeria of the Rhoynar was a warrior, and in her name, most women in Dorne are taught to wield a blade. Training women for battle is less common now, but most of us know how to defend ourselves. Around 100 Dornish women fought in the war. Interesting, Willa said in a neutral tone. I must confess that I know little of Dorne. In the north, only the women of House Mormont are trained to fight, unless you count the wildlings beyond the wall. My father always says that women belong to the home and men to the battlefield. I agree with him, Arthur said with swift and emphatic, stunning everyone. War is horrible. He froze, his eyes far away. He saw my sister die, Tygye quietly added. She touched Arthur's hand, comforting him, bringing him back to the present. Arthur looked at her, his eyes both warm and sad. Once she was certain that he was better, Tygye continued. I am also rather reluctant to believe women should be in war. Many of the Dornish women who fought did not return home. Something in her face and voice hardened. But women should know how to defend themselves and the ones they love. My father trained myself and my sisters, and Allie so that we could be safe. Arya has been learning to use a sword as well, Jon added. Rosier's eyes went wide and Rob looked a little sheepish. Arya training with a sword was not a secret, not really, but it wasn't widely talked about either. It was apparent that the young woman had not been told all the secrets of House Stark, which reminded Alice of something. Have discussions concluded between your parents? She addressed the question to Rob and Willa. Once they had both processed the abrupt change of topic, they managed small, shy smiles. Our betrothal was confirmed this morning, Rob answered. They all congratulated the pair warmly. Someday soon, this young woman would be Robe's wife, and eventually she would be the Lady of Winterfell. The more they spoke, the more young Wesela Manderly shone. She was clever and lively, spirited and gentle. She would be a good addition to the family, and a good leader for the North. Eddard Stark breathed deep, feeling the chill of the morning air fill his lungs. Though a few weeks had passed, being in Winterfell with his family, his whole family was still new, very new to him. His people were returned to the north as well, except for a small contingent which remained in King's Landing to maintain a presence at court. Most of Ned's men had returned home, though not all. Heward, while and Jory had been slain by Yama Lannister's men when Ned's leg had been broken. Others had perished with Sir Loras Tyrell in the hunt for Gregor Clegane, and more had died in the battle against Lord Tyrell Lannister or against the Lannister forces in the Whispering Wood. Still, fewer lives were lost than what might have been had they lost the war, or if the war had been a drawn-out affair. He had spent the first part of the day after his return showing Alysanne, Jon, Arthur, Lucas, and Taiyang around Winterfell. The rest of that day had been spent with Maester Luwin, Roderick Castle, and several others who had been running Winterfell in his absence. He spent the following several days meeting with the few lords who had appeared to meet with him regarding various matters and to celebrate the harvest. More lords had arrived in the days since, some expected and some unexpected. Ned would need to find time to meet with each of them in turn, though when he would find the time only the gods knew. He bowed his head a final time before the heart tree, still glad to be home again beside the weirwood of his ancestors and the black pool of water which lay at its base. Of all Winterfell's guests, the two who had been most anticipated were those with whom Ned and Catelyn had discussed betrothals. After long hours of discussion, and many ravens flying back and forth, 2 matches had been made, one for Robb and another for Sansa. Matches for the 3 youngest Stark children could wait until they were older. Robb had been reticent to agree with his parents' choice until he met the girl, to which both Ned and Cat had agreed. So when Lord Wyman Manderly arrived with his eldest son, Sir Wylis, and young Wyla Manderly, the Starks were considerably relieved. She was a pretty girl of age with Robb, with long blonde hair, and a very spirited disposition. She was also sound of body, lean, and slender, unlike her father and grandfather. Rose's reluctance to wed Manderly had faded after meeting the young woman. Ever since meeting and the official signing of their betrothal, they had spent every day together talking and walking around Winterfell. She also seemed utterly at ease with Grey Wind. She would make a good wife for Robb, Ned was certain, and a good lady of Winterfell one day. Sansa's match was also a good one, though for a girl who was to have one day been the queen, it lacked in grandeur. Still, when they brought the match to Sansa's attention, she smiled politely and said that she would do as she was bid. She did like her match, having known him since they were children. If the match went through, Sansa would one day be the lady of House Serwyn, the wife of Clay Serwyn. Ned stood from where he knelt before the heart tree, ready for the day. Soon the direwolves were around him, whining as though they were dogs. They were confined to the Godswood most of the time, with so many guests, both short and long-term, filling Winterfell. It wouldn't do to have so many direwolves running around, especially now that Nymeria had whelped her litter of pups. The she-wolf had become quite wary of outsiders since the pups had been born. Once Winterfell's population decreased, the wolves would be free to stay with the children. He walked from the Godswood. The yards were already filled with activity as he passed through them. Everyone bowed to him respectfully, most giving him hearty greetings. He greeted everyone he passed with a bow, stopping to speak briefly with some. He contemplated how many guests were in Winterfell and how many more were due to arrive. More than a handful of Freys were guests. 4 were fosterlings. The fostered Freys were part of a deal Catelyn had made with Lord Walder Frey for the Northern Army to cross the Twins. The boys were named Walder, Elmar, and Olivar. Olivar had served as Robb's squire during the Battle of the Whispering Wood, and the boys had become fast friends. The remaining Freys were Sir Perwyn, the full brother of Olivar, their sister Roselang, and Arwen and Shire Frey, who were full sisters to Elmar. Ned liked Perwyn and Olivar. They both seemed to be honorable young men. Lord Roose Bolton and his new wife Walda Frey were guests. Lord Bolton lacked in true-born heirs and had one bastard to his name. Walda was with child, a good hope for the future of House Bolton. She was the full sister to one of the fostered Walders. Ned could not help but think that the unwed Frey girls had been sent to Winterfell so that they could attempt to marry into House Stark. When Robb had led the Northern Army through the Twins, Lord Walder Frey had attempted to persuade Catelyn agree to a betrothal between Robb and a Frey girl, or for one of Ned and Catelyn's other children to wed a Frey. Catelyn had declined the proposition, deferring to the need for Ned's decision in the matter. Frey had not wanted to defy the hand of the king, but insisted that House Stark foster some of the Frey children. The 4 fosterlings had been the price of Walder Frey's cooperation in the war effort. Not that the Freys hadn't tried again to gain favors with House Stark. Sir Perwyn had been the one to ask for Alysanne's hand in marriage. Among the other guests who had arrived were Mira and Jojen Reed, Howland's children. Seeing them reminded Ned that he had not spoken with his old friend in many long years. He and Howland cared deeply for one another, but many painful memories surfaced whenever they met face to face. Ned had found it easier to maintain correspondence with his friend than to meet face to face. Still, seeing Howland's children was pleasant. Mira and Jojen had grown close to Bran since their arrival. Bran was quite frequently upset, angry that he could not run or walk or climb when all the other children could. The Reed children seemed to help Bran forget that he was broken, and with them he smiled easily. Bran seemed jealous of his 3 half-brothers and even of Arya. He seemed to be more accepting of Jon and Arthur. They were older, and they told him harrowing stories of tourneys, war, and Dorne. Arya and Lucas, on the other hand, were close in age to Bran, and they were both able to run and play with swords. Arya and Bran had once been close, and though she was trying to befriend her brother again, he often pushed her away. It was Arthur who began to bridge the gap between Bran and the rest of his siblings. One day, Arthur sat with Bran in the archery range and helped him learn to shoot a bow while seated. Arthur's Dornish bow was shorter and meant to be used while on horseback. Bran was eventually able to adapt to the seated bow, and one was custom-made for him. Eventually, the others joined Bran and Arthur in seated archery, and his anger toward them began to dissipate. After all the guests arrived, the harvest feast was held. The betrothals of Robb and Sansa to Willem Anderley and Cley Serwyn, respectively, were celebrated. They dined for hours, and the dining eventually turned into dancing. Ned watched his children as they danced. Robb and Sansa each partnered with their betrothed, talking as they turned. Jon and Tye danced together, scarcely partnering with anyone else. Alice and Arthur flitted between partners quickly, charming with easy smiles. They all seemed happy here. They all finally seemed to be getting along well. Only Rickon still seemed confused by his half-siblings, though he liked them well enough. So many new children were in Winterfell that Rickon did not understand the difference between new half-siblings and new acquaintances. Ned and Cat sat beside one another at the high table. His leg sore as it had been wont to do ever since it had broken at Yemi Lannister's hand, making dancing a chore rather than a delight. Bran sat with them, though he was eventually joined by Arya, Lucas, and the Reed children who distracted him and had him laughing easily. Eventually the 5 children left the hall, off to join the direwolves in the Godswood. When they were alone, Ned looked to his wife. She was watching the children intently. "Did you wish to dance, my lady?" She gave him an easy smile. "No, my lord, I am content to sit beside you." He slipped a hand in hers and squeezed. "Is all well? I received word that you were with Master Luwin for several hours." For a moment her eyes went bright with unshed tears. She forced a neutral expression. "We shall speak on it in the morning, my love. Tonight, let us enjoy the feast." So they did, though he could not stop his mind from worry. When they made love that night, there was a fierceness to her movements to which he was unaccustomed. She had kissed and touched him as though she never would again, as she had every time they had parted for a long time. When they curled together to sleep, he could feel her shuddering tears. "Please, Cat," he whispered, urgent. "What is wrong? I cannot sleep knowing that something is troubling you." After long, silent moments, she stirred. She turned in his arms and ran her delicate fingers through his beard. "I love you, Ned," she whispered, trembling, "and I do not want to hurt you." He pressed a kiss to her lips, tender. "Knowing you are in pain and cannot tell me why it hurts. What did Luwin tell you?" She pulled away, sitting up and breathing deeply. He sat beside her, their fingers intertwined. "I'm dying." Her words were so soft that he could almost believe he hadn't heard them. "What?" "A wasting sickness," she said. "But you seem well?" "For now," she agreed. "However, I have felt unwell for more than a moon turn. I thought it was nothing at first. We had been so busy that I thought my health strange merely due to the stresses of travel and missing our sons. Is there nothing he can do?" "Lessen the pain as it comes," she whispered. He didn't want to believe her words. Perhaps Luwin was mistaken. Cat didn't look ill. Wasting sicknesses could occur at any age, he knew. He also knew that the illness tended to seem different in everyone. It affected. He asked the question he dreaded. Did he say how long this might last? A few months or a year. For now he is reluctant to guess, as I still appear to be healthy. She laid her head upon his chest, nestling close to his heart. "I want us to find joy in the time that remains to us. I don't want to focus on this illness." He pressed a kiss to the top of her head, pulling her close. "I love you," was all that he could think to say. Robb Stark was seated beside the heart tree, cleaning his sword with an oilcloth as his father had taught him. The world melted away from him, becoming just the sword and cloth. The black water and red leaves, his betrothed found him there. Her long blonde hair with its strange greenish tint hung over one shoulder in a braid. Her hair had been dyed green in White Harbor. She had been forced to wash out the dye before coming to Winterfell. but some of the color had yet to wash away. She sat beside him, petting Grey Wind in silence. When he looked at her, she smiled. He liked her smile. It was warm, sweet, and playful. "Good day, my lady." "Good day, my lord." Her smile faded, replaced by sympathy. "I heard of your lady mother's illness. I am so terribly sorry." "Thank you." He did not want to think of his mother ailing. 2 weeks ago, Robb and his siblings had been seated in their father's solar with their parents and the maester. They explained the illness. They offered what little comfort they could. The reactions of Robb and his siblings were mixed and changed daily. Rilla looked at her lap. Her hands played with the end of her braid. "I have been thinking." She hesitated, a flush visible upon her cheeks when she looked up at him. "We are betrothed and of age to wed." Her flush deepened. "It might bring joy to your mother to see her firstborn wed." He set aside his sword, surprised. If they would marry before his mother, well, it would need to be sooner rather than later. "I agree that she would rejoice to see me wed. Do you truly wish to wed so soon?" The idea of marrying now seemed less peculiar than it might have once. He was a man grown. His half-brother was wed, and soon to be a father. "I am a woman grown, and we are to wed eventually. Why not wed now, unless you do not wish it?" Her blue eyes regarded him with questions and a touch of playfulness. "I would gladly wed you now," he replied, smiling, "though we should inform our parents of our wish." She laughed with agreement. He drew close to her, wrapping his arms around her, kissing her. They had kissed before, though this felt different. There was no tentativeness in this kiss. She was warm and welcoming, wrapping her arms around his neck, kissing him deep and long. A cough caused them to spring apart, cheeks flushing red, as Robb turned to see his father. Lord Stark's face was a mask, unreadable to Robb's eyes. "Father," he gasped, "I see that you and Lady Willa are happy with your betrothal." A sharp laugh escaped Wella's lips, while Robb forced a small smile. "We are," he replied. "We were planning to ask if we might wed soon." His father's brows knit in concern. "My lord," Wyro said quickly, "I broached the matter to Robb only a few minutes past. I thought that your lady wife would be pleased to see her firstborn wedded." Lord Eddard softened at her words. "I believe that you are correct. I will speak with your father later today on this matter. For now, do mind that your passions are more controlled where others may see you." Robb thought of his bastard half-siblings and bit his tongue. He knew that his father meant well. Still, he had no intentions of dishonoring his lady. "As you say, father, we will leave you to your prayers." They bowed to Lord Eddard. Standing, Robb strapped his sword to his waist and walked with his lady and his wolf from the Godswood. Catelyn held Ned's hand as they stood in the Godswood awaiting Willa Manderly and her father. Robb stood alone before the heart tree, his dire wolf seated nearby with the other wolves. He was hissing anxiously on his feet. Robb wore white and gray, trimmed with silver, the colors of House Stark. He was so handsome and so young. Her son was a man grown, but still she remembered the moment she had first held him in her arms. She was glad that she had lived to see this day. The bride walked into the clearing upon her father's arm to the sounds of pipes, harps, and drums. She wore a pale green gown accented with Mirish lace on her sleeves, neck, and bodice. Pearls were sewn on the bodice and sleeves, and more pearls adorned her long blonde hair. "She is a pretty girl," Catelyn thought. Widow seemed to be a good young woman, and someday she would be a good lady of Winterfell, and may the gods strengthen her when I am gone. It would be good for Robb to have a wife to comfort him. Catelyn closed her eyes against her tears and pain. How much longer would she have with her children? How much longer with Ned? She squeezed his hand tight. When she opened her eyes again, she looked at Robb and Willa. He smiled at his bride. Mirth lit her features. Willa passed from her father's hand to Robb's. Together, Robb and Willa said the simple oaths of marriage which were done before the old gods. He unclasped her cloak, a makeshift thing fashioned of a cloak and a banner of her house, and replaced it with a cloak bearing the dire wolf of House Stark. They knelt together before the heart tree and said their silent prayers to the old gods. When they stood turning to face the assembled crowd of family, lords, ladies, and guests, they kissed to cheers. Later they gathered in the great hall. Shouts of laughter and cheer echoed from the high rafters. Catelyn and Ned were seated to Robb's right, while Willa and her father sat to his left. The table below them held all of Robb's siblings, both trueborn and bastard. Further away were the various lords and ladies who had been able to attend on such short notice. Benjen had arrived from the Wall and was seated amidst all of his nephews and nieces. Were she not the Lady of Winterfell, she would have allowed herself to weep. She would never see her other children wed. She would likely never see a grandchild. Her thoughts wandered to the day her mother died. Catelyn had comforted Lysa and Daenerys upon their mother's death, but there had been no time for her to mourn. "You are the Lady of Riverrun now, little cat," everyone had told her. So, from that day forward, she had acted as befit a lady, and did as she must rather than as she willed. She helped run the castle in her mother's stead from that day until the day she left Riverrun for Winterfell. Her childhood died that day, replaced by duty most of the time. She had only been 10. "They are too young to bear this burden," she thought, looking at her children. They were laughing together, which was a wonderful change. In the weeks that had passed since telling the children, their moods had often been poor. Robb and Sansa had both stepped up to assist with running Winterfell, which was a great help to both Ned and Catelyn. Since Robb had led the Army of the North in battle, and had led Winterfell in the absence of his parents the previous year, it was easy to entrust many tasks to his care. Catelyn had been showing Sansa, Willa, Arya, Elisand, and Tyenn everything they needed to know in order to run a household. The older girls were all eager to help, the four of them all knowing that they were to run castles of their own very soon. Arya would try to focus on her lessons, but her way of handling the future loss of her mother was anger. More than once, Arya had stormed out of the room. More often than not, she would later be returned by her sword master in a much more subdued state. Sansa seemed to be handling the news too well most of the time. She was trying so hard to be a proper lady that she wouldn't allow herself the time to weep or curl against her mother for comfort. Catelyn knew that Sansa's main solace outside of the sept was her new direwolf pup, Winter. Nymeria's litter had consisted of 3 wolves. The light gray wolf was Sansa's Winter. The other 2 pups had been given to Ned's bastards. After some deliberation among the siblings, the wolf pups went to Arthur and Lucas. Arthur named his wolf Onyx. Lucas had decided to name his wolf Dawn. Catelyn was glad of the things which could distract her children. The wolves, the fostered wards, and now Robb's wedding were all things which were able to take their minds away from the loss which they met endure. Catelyn watched the children at the lower table. Belusier Sand laughed merrily with Sansa, Arya, and Tyenn. Belusier would leave for Cider Hall one day, and sooner rather than late, Tyenn would return to Queen Ariane's side with Jon. Ned's bastard sons would likely return south as well. Catelyn watched Bran and Rickon at the other end of the table, where they were being entertained by Benjen. Bran wasn't handling Catelyn's illness well either. He would find distraction from all his cares, spending time with the Reed children. Rickon knew that something was wrong, but was too young to comprehend death. Catelyn knew that Robb, with Willa's help, would be able to bear this loss. He and his new wife would start a family, and one day lead Winterfell. Sansa would also bear the weight loss well. She would become a dutiful wife when she came of age. Someday, Rickon would fight for his brother. Brains, though unable to walk, could use his mind as an administrator. Rosier, though. Catelyn's thoughts were troubled regarding her younger daughter. Rosier was constantly compared to her Aunt Lyanna. The notion sent a cold chill down Catelyn's spine. Lyanna Stark had been the Lady of Winterfell after her mother's death, just as Catelyn had done at Riverrun. Yet Lyanna had rebelled against the crushing duty of being Lady of a great house from so young an age, and ran into the arms of Prince Rhaegar Targaryen and death. What would Arya do against that weight? Unbidden, Catelyn looked to Alysanne and thought of her mother. Ashara Dayne had been raised without a mother as well, though Catelyn knew nothing beyond that fact. How different might they have been if their mothers had lived? Would Lyanna Stark have run away with Rhaegar if she had had a mother? Would Ashara Dayne have mothered 3 bastards? Would Brandon Stark have been so reckless? Would Catelyn's sister Lysa have grown into a happier woman? Would Edmure be married? As she contemplated Ashara Dayne, more unbidden thoughts crept into her mind, each tasting of bitter grief. Ned had loved her once, long ago. Catelyn had loved Brandon once, long ago. In a different world, they might all have been a united family, instead of the difficult mess which they had lived with for so many years. The more her mind fixated on these thoughts, an unexpected notion appeared. She hated the thought, and for the moment she did not want to consider the idea at all. Instead, she watched as her son and his new wife led the dances. They were beautiful, radiant. Husbands and wives come together for many reasons, but the best grow to love one another. Catelyn held on to the hope that the budding affection between her son and his wife would blossom and flourish. Catelyn's own marriage had endured many bitter days, and she still loved Ned with all her heart. She did not want him to be alone. Catelyn's own father had never remarried, yet he had also never been the same after Manissa's death. He had been alone until his own death. Only a few months passed. Ned's father had also never remarried. Would Ned remain alone after she died, though she didn't want to think of him with another woman? She also didn't want to think of him being alone for so many years. Her thoughts again ran to the beautiful and spiteful Ashara Dayne. He had loved her once, in a different way than he loved Catelyn, but he had still loved her. Would he want her again? No, he would never think to cause such turmoil by asking her to Winterfell. But if he were not a great lord and could follow his heart, would it lead to her once he was alone again? Catelyn truly did not want to know. She wanted to shout at the gods that this was unfair. She was still young, and her children little more than babes. Why did she have to die? Why did she have to leave her children? Her husband? She looked at Arya again, her wild she-wolf. She needs a mother, Catelyn thought. Whatever else she thought of Ashara Dayne, Catelyn knew that the woman was a loving mother. Ashara had shown great kindness to Sansa and Arya. She had also sheltered Jon as her own, for no reason but kindness. Could such a woman be trusted in Winterfell, to raise children who were not her own with love and care? To be wife to a man who had chosen duty over her? Would Ned want it? She did not want to think upon these things, but she knew that she would ponder the matter for many days to come. Winterfell was an interesting place for one who had grown up in Dorne. There was something cold and imposing about the vast structure, and yet it felt welcoming. Sir Jon Snow had come to accept this strange new place as his temporary home. His family's history was here, in the very foundations of Winterfell. He liked being here with his family, though he missed his mother, aunts, and cousin. He liked his half-brothers and half-sisters. He enjoyed learning about them. He wished that the inevitable separation across Westeros could be stopped. He wondered if they could still maintain their new friendships once they were parted. Jon entered the small sitting room closest to his bedchambers and found his wife seated upon a cushioned bench, stitching an intricate pattern into cloth. She favored him with a smile, though she only paused her attentions for a moment. "How are you feeling?" She had left Robb and Willa's wedding feast early. "As well as can be expected. The hall was too stuffy and noisy for me." He sat beside her, kissing her cheek. "Did you eat enough?" She giggled. "Yes, my worried one." Having no response, he smiled. "Very soon, this baby will be outside me, and you will have even more to worry over." "I was thinking about our baby and its future." "Oh?" "I have an estate and title which will pass to our child. We might be bastards, but our children will be more. They should have a name and arms which are noble." "They should," she agreed. "Have you thought of any?" "When Arthur and I participated in the tourney to honor father as Hand of the King, we used shields striped violet, white, and gray. I was thinking of that design, but you are Martell and those colors are important as well." She laid aside her needlework and pressed her lips together as she often did when thinking. "White is often used for the faith, which would represent my mother as well. Why not violet and gray with a white star? The star could have multiple points, representing Dayne, Martell, and the faith. Orange and red don't really work with the other colors. It would be rather pretentious to divide the coat of arms from our various houses and add a bend for our bastard status." Jon nodded. "I like the idea. Any idea for a motto?" She considered for a moment. "Lucky bastards." He burst into laughter. "Now that would be quite the motto." "I thought so, but our poor children would be so scandalized by it." "Hardly, but as they will be kin to the Queen's children, perhaps something better." "Deeds not words." "I like it. Do you think we should come up with a name for the child to use?" With a shake of her head, she leaned against him, running her hand along the swell of her abdomen. "No, I think the little one should choose." Tywin was kneeling before the altar to the mother when Catelyn walked into the sept. She watched the young woman for a moment before kneeling before the crone. A few minutes later, Tywin stood. She turned toward the door, but was stopped by Catelyn's voice. "Tieni?" "Yes, Lady Stark." Catelyn stood, then motioned toward one of the benches. "May we talk?" With a slow nod, Takan took a seat. Catelyn settled beside her a moment later. How was your pregnancy? Tyrion's calculating look softened into a warm smile. The maester says that all is well. I believe him, but I'm quite ready for this little one to be out already. I don't know how so many women go through this over and over again. Catelyn laughed softly. The rewards are worth the pains. Tyen stroked the swell of her belly as the child kicked a foot upward. True. What would you like to discuss, my lady? What do you think of Lady Ashara Dayne? Tyen looked up, blue eyes narrowing. The context matters greatly. Catelyn studied the young woman. Tierney was cunning. It was obvious in her eyes. In general, she laughed. That is still very vague. She's a good mother, an able house manager, capable of running the trade contracts of a noble house, and is a talented harpist. Her morals are questionable, but you already knew that. She's also rather emotional. Does that satisfy your question? It will suffice, thank you. I'm curious, why ask me, and not her children? Why ask me at all? Catelyn looked at her hands, twisting them in her lap. I wanted to speak to someone with a relatively unbiased opinion of Ashara. She laughed again. I'm hardly unbiased. Certainly I'm unbiased compared to your husband and his children with Ashara. But I'm also married to her son. Are you afraid that she'll come here after you die to usurp your position? Carter looked at Ta Yun, seeing an authenticity in the young woman's face that she had never seen before. Of course I am, but the matter is complex. I worry for my children and my husband. I have no care left for myself. I am very sorry for your illness. There was genuine sorrow on her face. You have shown great kindness toward myself and to your husband's bastards. No matter what you may think of Lady Ashara, know that she isn't a grand schemer. She would never bring harm to your children. She cares too much about your husband to harm any of his children. Catelyn gave her a light, sad smile. Thank you. Cat, I cannot think of this. Ned stood from the bed, shaking his head. Why not? She pulled her bedrobe around her shoulders, moving to sit near the edge of her large bed. I grow worse every day. Master Lowen believes I may pass before 4 turns have come and gone. I no longer worry for myself, but for you and the children. He looked at her standing several paces away, illumined by the glow of the hearth. I cannot begin to imagine the world without you. She felt hot tears slide down her cheeks. I know, but I have made myself think of that future which draws ever nigh. I want to know that when I am gone, our children have a woman who will show them the love of a mother. I want to know that you will not be alone. I love you too much to wish years of solitude upon you. Our fathers never remarried. Don't you believe that they would have been happier with new wives? She did not give him much time to think before continuing. She had to speak before she thought her words through. You loved her once. You loved her enough to betray my trust. You proved that you loved me later, by never bringing her north and keeping her children in the south. But soon I will be gone, and when that happens, Ned, I do not want you to be alone. He sat beside her and held her close. They were silent for a long time. When he spoke, his voice was scarcely above a whisper. I will think about what you have said. She said nothing, and merely pressing her head closer to his chest. Eventually, he broke the silence. How long have you been considering this? I thought of it at Rob's wedding last month and have pondered it on and off every day since. Do you want this? A bitter laugh escaped her lips. Her tears slipped onto his chest. No, I want to live. I pray you to the gods every day that they will take this from me, and every day I grow worse. I have accepted that nothing will change, and yet I cannot sit idly by while I am dying. I must not. He held her close in the silence, each of them crying quiet tears. If you truly wish this, then in the morning we can discuss the details of such a proposal with Maester Luwin. She closed her eyes and swallowed hard. In the morning, a knock on her door brought Ashara Dayne's mind to the present. Enter, she called. She saw the door of her sitting room open. Eloria Sand entered, followed by 2 servants carrying trays of food and drink. Ashara felt her stomach growl as the scent of fresh bread and stew reached her nose. Her grace was worried when you didn't appear at the midday or evening meals. Eloria said as the servants placed the trays on the table, We learned that you had not been seen since letters arrived for you this morning. The servants left, shutting the door again. I have been thinking, Ashara replied, looking at the letters which lay on the table in front of her. She picked at the bread which had been brought and ate a piece. Then she picked up one letter and held it out to the other woman. Ilaria sat beside her, reading. Several letters had arrived that day. Some were business for Starfall or Severin Hall. One had come from Lady Marissa Dayne, inquiring about 2 merchants who were expected to arrive within a month. Marissa also wrote that Edric had finally come home for a brief visit. From Blackhaven, Illyria had written to announce that she was pregnant. The letter which Illyria was reading had come from Winterfell. Ashara had eaten half the loaf of bread. When Illyria finally looked up at her, her expression betrayed none of her thoughts, save concern. "This is quite extraordinary. Do you know what you will do?" "No, I have no notion of what I should do. It would be an honor for you and your house if you accept the proposal." "Would it?" Her tone was sharp, distressed. "You know what they call me in Dorne among my own people. In Winterfell, by the gods, I do not want to know how they think of me." She shuddered, contemplating the vulgarities which she knew had been applied to her, some deservedly so. "Why allow them to bother you? The Lord of Winterfell has requested a betrothal with you, and his ailing wife has approved the match." "She hates me." Illyria raised a brow, but said nothing. Catelyn Stark had every reason in the world to hate her. Ashara had caused Ned to betray Catelyn. When at last they had met, Ashara had behaved as though she were a jealous adolescent, baiting the Lady of Winterfell into a battle that Ashara had lost long ago. This seeming kindness felt wrong. "I understand why she dislikes me, but that is why I am more distressed by this matter." Illyria remained silent, listening. "I feel as though I would be an opportunist if I agree, and yet I understand the request. They wish for a woman of high birth to guide their children and know that I have raised mine well. And she wants Ned not to be alone. He seems in denial over the matter, but willingly offers a betrothal to me. I understand the request, and yet it terrifies you." "Yes, I know that I will not be wanted in Winterfell, but do I have a choice? My children are almost all grown. 3 have their futures laid out while Lucas is still just a boy. I could remain with the Queen, but I am not at home here. I could return to Starfall, but Marissa has never been totally welcoming to me. If I remain in the south, I know that Jon would house me, or Allie, or Alice. However, none of those places would be mine own. And in Winterfell, you would finally have a position of your own. But would it truly be mine own?" Illyria said nothing. "Robb Stark has wed, which means that his wife is already learning to be the next Lady of Winterfell. She is young. Was it not easier for your brother's wife to run Starfall with both yourself and your sister?" "Of course. And for the 3 of you to be involved in the upbringing and the educations of your children and young Lord Dayne." "Yes. Might I suggest that Winterfell would be better run with your help, even as Starfall was?" Ashara cradled her face in her hands. "It might. I need time to think it through." And Illyria stood, laying the letter upon the table. "You do not seem to have much time." Ashara looked at the letter. "No, I don't." Taino studied the tiny features of her day-old daughter. The sensation she felt was so strange and overwhelming that she had no words for it. This tiny life she had carried within her was now a living, breathing infant in her arms. She had never known love so deep existed until she held Sienna. Sienna was utterly hairless, so knowing whether or not her hair would be light or dark was quite impossible for the moment. Deshani suspected that her daughter's hair would be dark, given her lineage, though Tyen had taken after her mother in coloring. So her daughter might as well. As with all infants, Tyen could not see any features which reminded her of anyone in the family, except perhaps Sienna's little nose, which looked quite like Ariane's, and her dark purple eyes, a Dane trait, if indeed Jon was a Dane. Tainy had spent more than a year pondering and puzzling over little details that would likely have been lost on most people. It had begun with her betrothal to Jon and had not abated since. Speaking with her father in King's Landing about her confusion had only raised her suspicions. She had asked around Winterfell about Lord Eddard's movements during the rebellion and had reached a tenuous conclusion. Jon had left her for the moment, retiring to his rooms for rest. He was a Stark, she knew. Was he also truly a Dane? A few hours later, there was a knock upon her chamber door. She bade her visitor enter, and was greeted by Lord Eddard Stark. She smiled at him from her cushioned seat beside the hearth. "Good morning, my lord," she said with a smile. "Have you come to see your little granddaughter?" He smiled warmly. "I have, and to inquire as to your health. Your maester assures me that I am doing well. I ache, though that is to be expected. Sienna is also well." "That is good to hear. I'm glad that you are both doing well." She held Sienna out to him as he walked to her. He took the infant in his arms, cradling her. A soft smile lit his features. "How fares Lady Stark?" His smile faded. "She worsens daily." "I am sorry. Has there been a reply from Lady Ashara?" He looked to her briefly. "None as of yet. These must be trying times for you, my lord. I cannot imagine the sorrow." He looked at Zoraida again. "There is much sorrow, but there is also much joy. The gods bring us both in their time." She murmured her agreement, thinking of her sister. Nymeria had died nearly a year past. Some days, the pain of loss still took her breath away. Even so, the joy of her marriage and daughter were just as strong. Her mind wandered back to Jon, to the doubt she had of his parentage. "Who is Jon's mother?" she asked quietly. Lord Stark stiffened, his reaction too slow to hide his shock. She had distracted him with thoughts of his wife, his former lover, and this child he called granddaughter. "Ashara," he replied in a voice that betrayed his distress. "Why do you ask?" Her smile was all sweetness and innocence. "Who is his father, then, my lord?" He seemed to be at a loss for words, his eyes betraying the lie he would tell. "I am." His voice was cold. "I ask again, why are you asking me of Jon's parentage?" "Because you are lying," she answered, still smiling, though she sobered her tone. "I have asked many questions, my lord, and every answer has led me to a troubling conclusion. Either you are not Jon's father, or Ashara is not Jon's mother. Or both statements are true, and Jon is a Stark," and her voice trailed off. "His mother was from Lys, Brandon is his father." She laughed, but paused to consider his words. He laid Sienna in her cradle, his face a cold mask. She hadn't considered Brandon Stark as a possibility. Were it true, Jon would be the eldest of the Stark children. Covering up a bastard of Brandon Stark would be wise if one wanted to reduce potentially sticky issues of succession. However, her father would have told her to her face if that were true. Prince Oberyn Martell had told her to drop the matter, which had only seemed to flame her curiosity. "No, my lord, for I think my father would have spoken more kindly to me if that were the case." "Jon is Rikers, isn't he? By your lady sister." Eddard Stark seated himself across from her, his brow knit somberly. "How did you come to that conclusion?" She told him. She started with her suspicions regarding her betrothal, and ended with how she had asked totally innocent questions about Robert's rebellion as the men of Winterfell had experienced it. "It is a clever lie," she told him. "Both that he is a Dane or that he is your elder brother's." He considered her with solemn gravity. "What will you do with this knowledge?" She reached into the bassinet and picked up her daughter, laying the girl on her chest. "Nothing," she said simply. "I have a daughter to protect, and a husband. My father, uncle, cousins, sisters, and your own children would be in danger if the wrong person heard. Although were the king to be a threat to my child, it is a simple matter to manage him. My sweet cousin is with child." She spoke so softly and sweetly that her words were incongruous to her tone, but he understood her meaning and seemed to shiver. "Will you tell Jon?" She ran a gentle hand along her daughter's back. "I do not know, not now. Why burden him with knowing? I may if I believe the time to be proper. Have no fear, Lord Stark. Yosin's death has made war seem bitter instead of sweet to my lips. Even if Jon should learn the truth, he is not a fool. He would protect our family. And this knowledge only brings peril. Rest easy, Lord Stark. This secret is safe with me."